Like and subscribe for daily videos. Night shifters. Ever witnessed a paranormal activity? If so, what was it? I used to intern in a recording studio in NYC years ago where it was technically open 24/7, meaning there was always someone there whether clients were in or not. Anyway, it was on an upper floor of a building, and due to the amount of expensive equipment inside, you could not access that floor by elevator without someone letting you up. The button for that floor was locked out, so you couldn't press it from inside the elevator. There was a camera at the front entrance downstairs, another at the elevator entrance, and one inside the elevator, all of which could be viewed from the front desk of the studio, so when people arrived you would buzz them in, wait until you saw them enter the elevator, and then you would have to push the button for the studio floor to bring the elevator up. Well, anyway, one of the nights I was working the overnight shift and it was just me and another dude, doing cleaning, maintenance, etc., when we hear the elevator start running at probably like 3:30 in the morning. The whole building is all offices, so really there is nobody in the building past 5 to 6 p.m. besides us, so we thought it was a bit strange. The other guy looks at the cameras and there's nothing at all, no one in the elevator either. So although it's weird, we just figure someone must still be in the building and called it from a different floor. It made sense until all of a sudden we see it stop at our floor and we hear the door ding. We're both in the lobby about 15 feet away from the elevator and we give each other the hardest WTF stare ever. I can't explain how much I didn't want those doors to open. We stare like a deer in headlights, completely motionless at the doors as they open. Nobody is there, no one pushed the button, nothing. We both keep staring completely still and silent, and it becomes really fucking creepy as time goes on and the doors don't shut, as if something is standing in doorway blocking the sensor. The doors usually close after 5 seconds or so, but we stared at it for a good 20 to 30 seconds or so before they closed and the elevator returned back to the lobby. We stared for a bit longer before simultaneously looking at each other and saying, "What the fuck, dude?" The next day we asked a couple of the other guys about it and one of the guys said the same thing happened to him in the middle of the night when he was by himself. He said he almost shit himself. Maybe there's a logical explanation for it, elevator malfunction, etc., but it was really damn freaky since the place was generally kinda creepy at night and there had been some other weird things. I don't inherently believe in ghosts, but if I had a paranormal story it will be this one. I work in one of the major ERs in my city as HCA. One of my many tasks is post-mortem care on patients who die in our care. One night at around 2 a.m. I was called to the room of an older patient whose palliative had passed and the family had finished their goodbyes. So I went in to start providing care. This usually means removing any tubes, wires, and monitors from the patient, giving them a bed bath, removing any valuables from the body to give to the family, putting them in a gown and shroud. I like to talk to my patients even if they have passed, as it puts me at ease, and shows respect to them. I explain my actions and talk them through what I'm doing because even though they have passed they are still my patient. While I was proceeding with the bed bath of the patient, out of nowhere I felt like I was being watched, and then I felt a hand on my shoulder and a man's voice tell me thank you. The hand remained for a moment while I stood there frozen, and all the feelings stopped and the room felt empty. There were no other nurses or staff in the area at the time, just me. I like to believe that the patient I was providing care for was thankful for my explanations and me continuing to talk to them through their care. Edit. Thanks for the awards and the gold. Never expected my comment to get this far. I don't have a story, but here's the one my wife likes to tell. She is a nurse and for a couple of years she was working night shift in the palliative care unit, which is the comfort care / end-of-life unit. Patients in that unit are expected to die, or to be sent home or to a care home to die. Anyways, those rooms also had a radio, and according to her it happened a few times that a radio suddenly turned on, and within an hour or so a patient would pass on. One rather busy night, the radio turned on and my wife went into the room, stared into the darkness and said, "Cut that out. I don't have time for this shit." And the radio suddenly snapped off. No patient died during the rest of her shift, but one passed away shortly after she clocked out. A lab building where I once worked was the site of a murder-suicide, which happened while I was there. Awful and sad. We didn't have shifts per se, but I had to work late one night autoclaving equipment for the next day's experiment. The autoclave room is right next to the lab where the event took place. I hadn't seen anyone else in the building. After I started the load, I was about to leave the room when I heard a crash outside. I immediately opened the door and saw that all the contents of a table in the hallway had been pushed to the floor. Water bottles, a packet of papers, pens, etc. Since I was right by the door at the time, I would have seen and or heard someone running away. It was against protocol to leave things in the autoclave overnight, so I had to stay an hour and a half to get them out, but nothing else happened. I left the stuff on the floor, though. Didn't want a repeat of that. I used to work at a 24-hour subway. I know, great start to a paranormal experience story, huh? Well, one day I was doing the dishes, and my coworker was cleaning the toaster oven and bread oven. Out of nowhere, around 3:30 a.m., I heard our door chime go off. Out of habit I say welcome to Subway as I turn the corner. Nobody there. Coworker gone. I thought okay, maybe he hopped the counter and went for a cigarette outside as he did from time to time. Heading back to the sink to finish the dishes, I hear the door chime again. Nobody. Checked the bathrooms. Nobody. What the hell? I ignore the dishes, and stand at the front counter, eyeing the doors. Couple minutes later, my coworker comes through the back door where we get our deliveries. "Where'd you go?" I asked him, turning towards the back door area. "To take out the trash," he replies. Door chime. He does the same thing as me. Welcome to Subway, turns corner to see nobody there, but this time the door was wide open. Our doors are weighted to where they'll close on their own if you let go of them. Door stayed open for a couple minutes as we stared. Then suddenly slammed. Not a windy night, and our doors wouldn't even stay open like that on the windiest of days. Have no idea what caused this, or why it happened on that particular night, but after I got a different job I was told it never happened again. Told my boss about the incident and we all looked at the cameras. Nobody could explain it. Edit, typo. Night watch in the barracks at Fort Gordon. That's a night shift, right? Anyway, so many things happened in 3 different rooms that I could write a book. It completely changed my belief in paranormal activity. This one took place in the middle of the night, so this is the one I'll tell. I'm sitting by the stairwell on the 2nd floor and hear someone shouting in a room down a hallway. I'm on duty, so I run to the room and swing open the door expecting to see some fighting. There are several people in this room pointing up to the ceiling next to a wall and telling me, they're doing it again. I ask them to explain and they tell me that ever since they moved into that room someone lifts up the ceiling tiles and makes funny faces at them at night. The latrine is on the other side of the wall, so I go over to see if anyone is there and there isn't. So I climb onto a desk in the room to lift up the ceiling tiles to see if they're still up there. When I lift up the ceiling tiles all I see is a cinder block wall that goes all the way to the floor above. There's only about an inch between the back of the ceiling tile and the wall. No way a face was there. 2 of the soldiers freaked out and ran out of the room and slept in the hallway. This was only the first of many incidents. And this is another. This was near graduation, so the drill SGTS treated us more like equals at this point, which is why I was able to hear the drill sergeant explain it to us. A new class came in and several soldiers were escorted by their drill sergeant to their room and she goes back to her office downstairs. I've got duty that day, fire watch I think is what they called it, I believe. Anyway, I am sitting at one end of the hall and can see them at the other end. Several minutes pass and the drill sergeant comes back up the stairs and see them. She stomps her way down the hall and we're expecting all hell to break loose because they still have all their gear on the floor and are standing outside the room. I can hear several of the choice words and many of those words would make a grown man weep. Suddenly she stops, does an about face and walks really fast towards me and down the stairs. Her face had a look of fear and F this. Later that day in the rec room someone asked her what that incident was about. This is what she told us. When she was finished laying into the soldiers about obeying the orders of your superiors, once of the soldiers told her that the room was already occupied. In her mind she said she was thinking, not this, and then the soldiers explained that someone was sitting there writing a letter at a desk and crying. They looked back in the room to point him out to her, but he was gone. That's when she turned around and went back to her office. She told us that the story is that someone had committed suicide in that room after writing a letter. For years this same scenario plays itself out with the new class that gets assigned to this room. It happens often enough that the story gets passed in first-hand accounts from one drill sergeant to the next. She was one of those hardcore soldiers looking to prove herself. She never once showed weakness or fear before this, but this shook her to the core. When she was done telling this to us, she looked like all she wanted was a hug. I was feeling sorry for her at that point. Worked at a movie theater running the booths upstairs. The projectors are upstairs, obviously, in a long corridor. At night, after the last showing in each theater, You shut off the lights to the theater and the small one over the projector itself. Then you cover the platters to protect from dust. It's not so bad the first few, because at least the lights of nearby projectors are still on for the theaters that are still running. But, as you shut each one off one by one, the corridor gets darker and darker and that little viewing window into each individual theater is pitch black. That dull, steady whirring noise you've toned out all night is gone and is now replaced by absolute silence, and there's hardly any light left anymore. Just the lights at the end of each corridor where you sit in between each start time. It's spooky enough is what I'm saying. But one particular night, I'm throwing the covers over one of the platters and I casually glance up into the viewing theater window across the way. And there's a face. It's a little boy's face and it's sheet white. I know what I saw. I'm sure there's an explanation for it and there's nothing supernatural about it, but there was a face there and it scared the absolute shit out of me. It made an already unsettling environment that much more terrifying the rest of the time I worked there. Also, for the record, inside the actual theater, these windows are a solid 8 to 10 feet above the seatbacks in the highest row. So, if someone was playing a prank, they'd need a ladder and even then they'd have nowhere to set it. I think you guys will appreciate this one. I was a manager at a theater and would also do the basic projection work sometimes, thread projectors and the occasional build-up/tear down of films. Our setup had a row of 4 theaters, so we also had a long, dark booth. It was really just a tiny corridor with the projectors sitting in it that dead-ended with the projector for Theater 4, what a fire hazard. One day I was alone there in the dark threading up Projector 3. This thing had a history and everyone knew about it. It would turn on and off by itself. Once it came on and someone unplugged it, but it kept running. Anyway, it was harmless enough, so we just laughed it off. So there I was threading it up before the first shows of the day when I was overcome with this intense feeling of dread. I felt the temperature drop to frigid just like people describe, my body hairs stood on end, the whole 9 yards. I wasn't on anything and I've never felt something else like that before or since. I had a fight or flight moment and ran out of there without looking back. I went into my office and just sat there for a bit. Our projectionist, who had just finished his real projectionist shit he was working on, came in with someone he was training. I told him to take the trainee and finish up the last 2 projectors since it would be good practice for her, so off they went. No need to let them know anything else. Both of them came back into the office pale and looking shocked. They described the same thing I'd felt in the same spot I'd felt it, and they did the same thing and ran. We eventually had to get a 4th person in there, and they had 0 issues. I made it a habit to find an excuse to take someone with me whenever I went there after that, but it never happened again. Not me, but a friend used to work as a night custodian for an elementary school, which the building itself was rather old, built in the 40s maybe. He was the 3rd shift guy, so he took over from the 2nd shift guy at like 9 p.m. He was basically there to mop the floors and make sure no one broke in. If he got all of his stuff done, he was pretty much free to do whatever he wanted. Often after he finished doing his work, he'd go hang out in an office because there was a small TV to watch. He said things started off innocently enough. Lights turning on in classrooms where he knew they had been off previously, cabinets and doors opening and closing on their own. He didn't pay much attention to it at first. He was sort of on the fence as to where he believed in paranormal activity, so he just shrugged it off as coincidences. At first, he would go and check the noises out. Sometimes he'd creep around and try to catch someone in the act, in case there was a way in that he didn't know about. After a month or so, he gave up looking and just learned to ignore it. He'd ask his boss about it and just get blown off. Over the coming months, things progressively got worse. Doors no longer closed on their own, they slammed shut. He heard noises like children playing, sometimes screaming. He'd find trash cans turned upside down. He'd have things thrown at him, but he would be clearly alone with nowhere for someone to hide and throw things at him. He'd contemplated quitting, but he was making good money for being nearly fresh out of high school and he needed the money for family stuff, so he stuck with it. He'd come in, rush through his duties for the night as quickly as he could and then go and sit in the office where he'd turn the TV to where he could sit facing the door, and that's where he'd sit until the morning crew came in at 6 a.m. He didn't want to admit that he was scared shitless of being in that school by himself at night, so he tried to tough it out and made a lot of excuses to try and explain what was going on. The last straw for him was the night he was sitting in the office watching TV and felt someone grab the chair from behind and flip him over backward. There was clearly no one in the room and no way for anyone to get into the room without him seeing them. He picked up the office phone and called his boss at home in the middle of the night, Said he quit and he'd come back in the morning to turn his keys in. He was definitely a believer in the paranormal after that experience. He said that it wasn't until years later that he found out from someone who'd researched the history of the school before it was torn down that there used to be a pool inside the school. A number of kids had drowned in over the early years of the school until the administration decided to finally expand the building, so they filled the pool in with concrete and expand over top of it. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for daily videos.